Hello. I'd like to thank the Organic Dairy and Pastoral Group for inviting me to tell my regenerative farming story. I'm not a real flash speaker, so I'll be reading this and I'll be going slowly so the Kiwi farmers on the call can understand my American accent. Right now I'm going to go share my screen and show you some slides of what regenerative farming looked like on my farm in New York. Here we go. So I started to use holistic planned grazing on my dairy farm in 2008 and learned firsthand that farmers can make money and impact the environment in a positive way by building topsoil. I started mob grazing because I wanted to produce the best tasting cheese and beef so I could compete in the competitive New York City retail market and make some more money. After 25 years of organic farming and 11 years of regenerative grazing, I now believe that meat, milk, and fiber from regenerative farms are the best choice for consumers who care about their health and the environment. I have the numbers to back this up on both soil testing data and fatty analysis done on our cheese. For instance, our cheese had CLA concentrations which were 300 to 400% higher than conventional cheese, and we also had higher omega-3 to omega-6 ratios. I did use all this data to help market my cheese. We had other goals, and they included growing more grass to feed our cows better. Over 11 years, we raised our soil organic matter an average of 0.5% per year with holistic planned grazing. To give you an idea of how much this is, if all New Zealand farmers could lift their soil organic matter just 0.25% per year, they would offset all of New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions, including methane. It is huge. There is no need for pastoral farmers in New Zealand to plant diverse annual crops. I coach my clients to focus on net profit per hectare. Mimicking how nature's super productive grasslands functioned is a cornerstone to regenerative farming. Perennial grass farming has always been New Zealand's unfair advantage. There is nothing sustainable about a farm that fails to make money. We learned to capture more solar energy across our farm by keeping something growing on it all of the time and lifting our pasture covers. We fully fed our cows on the highest quality portion of the pasture, which is the tops of the plant. And that maximized our milk production and beef rate of gain. We also saw a big improvement in body condition and animal health as the milk and meat got tastier. There is no separation between your health and the health of what you eat and what they eat. I dairy farmed in Vermont and New York State for 25 years. We were one of the first dairy farms in the US to become certified organic in 1997. New York State has as many dairy farms as the South Island of New Zealand. Average milk cow production is 10,000 liters, and New York State land is 63% diverse native forest. They get 1,000 millimeters of precipitation where I was. Before we raised our grazing management to the next level, we had farmed for 17 years grazing perennial ryegrass and white clover the Kiwi way. I used to think I needed, excuse me, to reseed paddocks every 7 years after a summer annual crop and a diverse winter crop. Our organic matter in the soil was good, but it increased very slowly over time and then plateaued around 5 to 7%. When we switched to mob grazing starting in 2008, We simply increased both our grazing and residual heights 5 centimeters per year to gradually raise our whole farm cover and allow the sward to naturally shift from ryegrass dominance to a salad bar of diverse plants. Immediately, my animal health improved. Eventually, my cows grew fat and shiny and bred back better. By 2015, we were down to only 1 or 2 cases of mastitis a year on 100 cows and 0% retained placenta. Lameness went away after we had struggled for years with it because we were feeding our cows too much protein when we managed ryegrass and white clover alone. Diversity is the secret to health of your cows and for soil health and for everything else. We hadn't needed to drench our calves for worms in 6 years because we learned how to properly feed them. Our milk and cheese was sweet and delicious, and my vet asked me why I wasn't calling him. Roots in our pasture went down at least 800 millimeters and pumped carbon into the soil through the liquid carbon pathway. Our soil structure was full of soil aggregates, leaving space for air and water infiltration. It wasn't until we managed for diverse pasture that included deeper rooted plants did we see soil organic matter levels increase to 0.5% per year. Just being organic and just grazing ryegrass properly had not done this. Deeper roots healed the water cycle, and native brook trout thrived on our farm. We decided not to buy K-line irrigation, even though drought was becoming more and more common. Our pastures no longer turned brown in the summer when temperatures got above 30 degrees and the rain shut off. Our feed costs went way down as a result of this, and we were reducing risk, which is a real cost to any business. A bird expert visiting my farm in 2016 identified at least 86 species of birds on the farm. The bobolink, shown on the left, is nicknamed the armyworm bird because caterpillars are their favorite snack. They are ground nesting birds. Our ground nesting bird population took off, excuse the pun, and the reason I am pointing this out to you is because you used to have heaps of birds nesting on the ground here in New Zealand. In New York State, we have many predators all looking for a free egg. These include rats, minks, weasels, fishers, raccoons, ravens, coyotes, skunks, fox, and so on. So why did the ground nesting birds thrive in the taller grass on my farm? It turns out it's the land management, not the predators, that decimate ground nesting bird populations. Bird nests in the grass are very hard to see, but I found out that cows don't step on the nests. After all, they evolved together. Mowing will destroy the nests. The bluebird shown on the right in this photo is our state bird in New York, and it's endangered. I had never seen one in my 50 years living in New York until a few pairs came to nest on the farm in 2012 and stayed. Heaps of insects fed all these birds. Ironically, more bugs means fewer pests. It's all about finding balance in nature. We had enough apples to make 150 liters of apple cider plus heaps of barrels for eating, but we never had a single worm in any of them. When colony collapse killed our honeybees, we saw heaps of native pollinators take over, which we had never noticed before. We were future-proofing our farm. Immigrants to America had brought over a culture of short grass pastoral farming from Western Europe, where they have a summer-safe West Coast marine climate. In our hot, dry summers, the short varieties like ryegrass and white clover went dormant. We needed our own unique farming template, and a holistic management helped us work that out for our location. Likewise, New Zealand farmers can also imagine farm systems that are unique to your region and adapted to New Zealand's conditions. I used to think that holistic management was just about grazing until I read the book. It's more about keeping money in your pocket and managing for the life you really want. I wish I'd read this book 20 years ago because I would have made a lot more money farming with less work. Before I raised my grazing up to the next level, I knew my MUNs were high in the spring and autumn, but I hadn't realized that high MUNs can cause off flavor in meat and milk until I started making cheese in 2006 and selling beef retail. Milk cows need a 17% protein diet, and our ryegrass pastures at the quality stage often were above 25%. Our cattle had to get rid of the excess nitrogen as ammonia, which used up a lot of energy and made it hard to keep condition on them. They dumped the excess ammonia into their blood and urine and the milk, which is unhealthy and caused some cows to go lame. With mob grazing, we lifted our grazing wedge and realized better animal performance because we provided more energy to the cows. The top half of the plant has the most energy, and we learned to graze off just the succulent top half of the pasture, so the cows were offered the optimal balance of energy with protein. It gives the cow what she needs to perform best and be exceptionally healthy, and luckily it grows more grass. It also made delicious cheese, so we could charge top dollar. This table supports the take half, leave half strategy. If you graze off 50% of the leaves by volume, it stops hardly any roots from growing, whilst if you remove 60% of the leaves, half of the roots die. It turns out taking 50% by volume is the same as taking 1/3 by the plate meter. My soil carbon was very good, but it didn't increase much after 15 years of proper ryegrass management. Not until we grew deeper roots and grazed half and left half of the forage did we see soil organic matter increase steadily at 0.5% per year. I learned from Christine Jones that the liquid carbon pathway is more efficient at pumping carbon into the soil. You want living roots and you want them to go deep if you want to see a substantial carbon increase. For every 1% increase in soil organic matter, you can hold 180,000 more liters of water per hectare. And this helped explain why my pastures didn't shrivel up in the summer. And I think the potential for this is huge. Again, if New Zealand farmers could increase their soil organic matter at 1/2 the rate that I did, just 0.25% per year, you could offset the entire country's greenhouse gas emissions, including methane. I learned from Ian Michelinis that our farms are one big solar panel, and how efficiently we turn solar energy into saleable product determines our profitability. We can maximize solar energy capture with higher whole farm cover year-round and by avoiding bare ground. Try to picture your farm's grazing wedge being represented by these shapes. The light green area is the residual area, and dark green is what you have available in your grazing wedge to graze off across the whole farm. If you are managing for perennial ryegrass, your grazing wedge looks like the top scenario. If you take your pasture up to the next level, you're leaving higher residuals, as you see on the bottom. You can offer your stock just the top half of the plant to eat, where the energy and protein are in the optimal balance. Notice that the grazing wedge you graze off is the same kgs in both scenarios. Although they eat the same kgs, they get quality that is better balanced and higher in energy by grazing at the next level. Stock are not pushed to graze down into the lower half of the plant where the lignin is the highest and the quality is the crappiest. Like all crap, this residual belongs on the ground as fertilizer. Feed this to your soil livestock by mopping up your stock with enough animal density to trample the residual down. Now, can you tell me which pasture wedge is a bigger solar panel? The bigger solar panel on the bottom grows you more feed quicker for the next grazing as it harvests more solar energy on the whole farm. This allows you to get more grazing events per year and make more money. Pasture should be up to the belly of your stock, whether it's a cow or a sheep, and be managed to be mostly green and vegetative. It shouldn't be what humans perceive as looking perfect. Only a green leaf can harvest solar energy. This is volunteer pasture on my New York farm. None of these grasses were seeded. These cows are grazing a diverse pasture planted in 2018 at Westridge Farm. The grass in the lower left is a good residual because the cows have eaten one bite off of all the plants. For the best results, shift them sooner than you think you need to. When I first presented this slideshow 3 years ago to several RMPP groups, I didn't have any photos of regenerative farming taken in New Zealand. Now I have heaps of which I have included in this PowerPoint. If you plant a diverse pasture mix, like Mark Anderson did here, you need to manage these paddocks at the next level right away and leave higher residuals so that the paddock doesn't revert back to ryegrass. A holistic grazing plan will help you target every grazing event for when the plants are at full recovery, but haven't gone past where you will lose quality. I help New Zealand farmers complete and implement their own summer grazing plans just before the next growing season starts in the winter. Healthy pasture equals healthy stock. They are the same whole and include soil biology and us. Once the soil biology was running on all 4 cylinders on our farm, our grass was leafy and green all the way to the bottom. Only green leaves can harvest solar energy again, so that is what we manage for. You should have very little brown thatch at the bottom. With optimum soil biology and shade, the worms and soil life turn any dead grass quickly into fertilizer. Also, dung left at the previous grazing should be recycled into the soil by the time you graze a paddock again. In medium to high rainfall temperate climates like ours, thatch will cycle quickly into the soil if the soil biology is healthy and active. When you part the grass, you should see worm castings like we see here on Tony and Michelle Pringle's farm in New Zealand. You shouldn't see a lot of thatch if the soil biology is functioning well. As I lifted my covers, diverse plants appeared in my paddocks without being seeded, like timothy, red clover, cocksfoot plantain, brome grass, hairy vetch, and lotus. Some Kiwi farmers tell me that tall grazing won't work here in New Zealand because you don't have native grass seeds in the soil like we do in America. It turns out that none of the plants which volunteered in my paddocks without being seeded are even native to New York. They all come from Eurasia, like most of your pasture species. Many of the same plants growing in your verge appeared in our pastures like you see here. It turns out our earthworms in New York are not even native. After 5 years of mob grazing, my pastures were so thick you couldn't walk through them without tripping, and diversity had exploded. I realized I didn't need to renew my pastures because they were better than anything I could buy in a bag. I was also sick of bringing in weed seeds, so I sold my drills and seeders. I ended up with 20 to 25% of the sward in perennial grass and 50% in legumes like red clover, white clover, hairy vetch, and lotus. So can this happen in New Zealand? On a trip with Ian Michelinis, we found proof that you can grow diverse pasture in New Zealand with grazing management alone. You don't have to renew all your paddocks. So this is pasture at Malcolm and Twix White's farm north of Napier. You don't need to seed down the whole farm with diverse mixes. Just start right away with what you have by increasing residual heights gradually coupled with the optimum spells. Don't let grasses go to seed, but graze at the boot stage and mob your animals to maintain quality and fertilize the soil. At the White's farm, Ian Michelinis was very impressed with the width and sheer size of the leaves on the farm. Diverse shapes most efficiently harvest both direct and reflected sunlight, making the paddocks super solar panels. The Whites had mastered growing a bigger solar panel to maximize solar energy harvest. They hired Ian Michelinis to teach them how to get better quality. More grass alone will not make you money if you allow it to go rank. You need to use animal density to promote quality so you can get a profitable conversion of that energy to product. Remember, and I'll say it over and over, only a green leaf can harvest solar energy. Ian Michelinas came to my farm in 2011 to teach us how to get quality pasture. By that time, many dairy farmers all over the northeast of the US were trying tall grass grazing, and Ian was sponsored by our Organic Dairy Producers Group. Like most farmers who were trying holistic plan grazing, I was letting the grass get too mature, like you see in the top photo. He taught us how to grow green, vegetative pastures, like in the bottom photo, using the tool of animal impact. Ian taught us to allow the pasture to recover until the seed head is in the boot during spring and summer, or still hidden in the stem of the grass. This is an ingenious way to know you have taken maximum advantage of the fastest growth stage of the plant, which Andre Voisin calls the blaze of growth. This diagram is from Andre Voisin's book on pasture management, Grass Productivity. It shows you that you can grow heaps more grass in the same amount of time if you are coming off a higher residual. And this should make sense to all grazers out there. To get the data for Voisin's sigmoid grass growth curve, a researcher named Linehan measured how much the pasture grew at 10-day intervals after a grazing event. I put this information on a bar graph to illustrate the fact that grass grows the fastest at the end of the recovery period. Voisin called this the blaze of growth. In 20 days after animals leave the paddock, which is represented by the middle bar, instead of growing twice as much feed as the first 10 days, they grew 3 times more pasture as the rate of grass growth increases. In 30 days, instead of growing 3 times as much grass as the first 10 days, they grew 10 times more kgs of pasture. You rest the grass 3 times longer than the first 10 days, but you get 10 times the feed. The top bar represents the blaze of growth. Waiting until the boot stage allows you to ride that blaze of growth all the way up to the top, but not too far where the plants go to seed and quality crashes. So this recovery time should become the basis for your target recovery periods for every month on your grazing plan. Once my biology was humming, I rested my pastures until the 3.5 to 5.5 leaf stage of ryegrass or 4 to 7 leaf stage of cocksfoot to make sure I had nailed all the blaze of growth. If you're starting out, just extend your recovery times gradually. It turns out when ryegrass is in a diverse sward, it can grow many more leaves without the bottom leaf turning brown, and we could get up to 5 leaves on our ryegrass tillers. You'll also find as soil health improves, the grasses will grow many more seeds, will grow many more leaves before setting seed. If you have old pastures with a lot of brown top, dog's tail, and older varieties of ryegrass, you can tell if your grass is recovered when the leaves have grown a pointy tip after being squared off the previous grazing. This is New Zealand sheep pasture, which is not quite ready. Full recovery has nothing to do with the height. It depends on what you're starting with. Leaves should still be green when you graze it. This sheep pasture is ready because the leaf tips are pointy now. Use leaf stage as a guide during the time of year when plants are not going to seed and you can't measure it by the boot stage. A transitioning sheep farm can graze ryegrass at the 2-leaf stage with any mob with lambs in it to still have quality for rapid gain. This won't hurt your pastures if later on you can give them better recovery. This photo is of Andrew Roy's autumn sheep pasture in Edendale. Last spring we had a huge flush of spring grass, but by the end of January, on every farm I went to visit from Canterbury down to Southland, the stock were ahead of the grass. Dairy cows were grazing grass at the 2 to 2.5 leaf stage and sheep even lower. Paddocks could not get the longer rest required for full recovery because too much feed was wrapped up in plastic. All these farmers were missing out on the blaze of growth. Everyone knew the stock were ahead of the grass, but some just ignored it. Some were feeding out the baleage they had just made the month before. How profitable is that? A simple grazing plan helps you to nail the optimal pasture recovery times, especially in the summer when the sun is at its peak and more green leaves are most beneficial, but hardly any farmer achieves it. A plan also helps you adapt proactively to drought, flood, or whatever nature throws at you. Ian Mitchell-Innes also teaches farmers to keep an eye on animal performance. If you are making milk or growing beef or lamb, fully feed them. I think to raise tender beef, your stock must be growing rapidly every day of their lives. Most farmers put a lot of effort and money into genetics, so why not feed to realize the full genetic potential of your stock? This is what mob grazing looks like on the Belski's sheep and beef farm. Providing your stock with the top half of the sward balances energy, but the pasture must be mostly green and vegetative to be profitable. Mobbing or high animal density is how we manage quality because it discourages selective grazing. We're striving to have the stock harvest only one bite off of almost all the plants and trample most of the rest. Some of this trampled forage will stand back up, and that's okay. Higher animal densities allow you to graze more evenly and have fewer weeds. Please shift them quicker than you think you need to, and they must be fully fed. Once your stock have eaten half of the pasture by volume, shift them on, and you'll need to shift them quicker than you think you need to. A grazing plan helps to figure out how to have enough pasture in the rotation to have sufficient recovered pasture ahead of you in the summer to be able to do this. We get the best outcomes when we mimic nature. In the wild, grazing ruminants get away from the area they contaminate quickly because eating near one's own dung is unhealthy. Mob them up as dense as practical, so long as it makes sense for the class of stock and the time of year, and then follow with enough rest to collect all the interest from the full blaze of growth period. These are Mark and Madeline Anderson's cattle on a newly seeded, diverse pasture. Notice the high residual that the cows are coming out of. The mobbing creates competitive behavior so that they will mow the paddock evenly to reduce tag and weeds from developing and reduce your ineffective area. All the concepts we've talked about here are also true for sheep, but I don't recommend mobbing up ewes and lambs until after tailing. A grazing plan does give you the ability to plan backwards to arrange to have quality lamb pasture when you need it. Here are some ideas of how you can start raising your grazing wedge. First, you can supplement more in the paddocks in late winter and early spring to let the grass grow in all of your other paddocks. For every bale you feed out, you will grow 6 bales worth of pasture on the farm because you lift covers across the entire farm. Plan to lock up fewer paddocks for machine harvest in the springtime to lift your covers by having more paddocks in the grazing round. It's very important that your whole farm solar panel functions at a high level when solar energy is the strongest in the summer. Again, leaves cannot harvest solar energy wrapped up in a bale. Likewise, winter crop paddocks like the one here behind the bales was bare and harvested no solar energy since June, meaning the previous 6 months it was losing money for this farmer. All of this will stimulate the grass to tiller and result in the best animal performance. Mobbing stock into the fewest number of mobs and shifting them often will result in the best quality pasture for the next graze. The higher the stock density, the less selective grazing will be. Springtime is the most important time to put effort into subdividing paddocks and will pay huge dividends dividends for the whole season because you reduce ineffective mosaic patterns. On Hamish Belsky's farm, he was shifting animals 4 times a day when I took this photo in the summer. How well you mob them up with small breaks and how frequent you shift them determines how much tag and weeds you will end up with. Only green leaves can harvest solar energy, so avoid ungrazed mosaic by balancing your animal density. Keep on target with recovery periods as grass grows slower in the summer, and add paddocks to the grazing round, or supplement with feed, or even destock if you need to. Don't do nothing and chew out your grass. That will shrink your solar panel. My shortest rest period, shown on my farm here in the springtime, was 18 days. I lengthened that to 40 to 45 days in the autumn, and it all depends on the weather. These ranges seem to work pretty well in South Otago as well, but you need to be flexible. There's no recipe, and that's why this type of grazing is often called adaptive grazing. If some paddocks get ahead of you in the springtime and go to seed, shut up some of them for deferred grazing instead of machine harvesting all of them. Deferred grazing will give you a tool to lengthen pasture recovery times on the whole block proactively. And you'll be doing this right as grass growth is slowing, so you don't miss out on the blaze of growth. It does this in 3 ways. First, deferred grazing gives you the option of bringing the paddock back into the rotation as soon as you need more paddocks to achieve your recovery target as grass growth slows. Here, Mark Anderson is grazing his heifers on deferred grass last year. To safeguard animal performance, graze only the best 1/3 of deferred pastures when you bring the paddock back into the rotation the first time. In this case, it may not be the tops, but the stock know where the highest energy is, so trust them. Strip graze with frequent shifts to both fully feed the stock and trample pasture down to soil level. Small breaks of short duration are best, but move the stock when they start to eat under the fence. The shifts need to be much faster than you think. These are my cows on deferred grass in 2015. We strip grazed this paddock with heifers in 2016, just after the summer solstice, because it had headed out. Deferred grazing will allow you to grow more feed in that paddock for years to come, and will also reduce weed pressure because tall prickly weeds get pulled down into the soil along with the tall grass. Trampled grass is not waste. It's a fertilizer application. The sheet composting effect creates a massive worm farm, and the increased soil carbon helps drought-proof your farm. This fertilizer must be applied by livestock as close to the soil as a worm can jump. The grass must be punched into or flat onto the soil surface for worms to utilize it. This is why God made hard hooves for ruminants. They and the grassland and everything in it were designed to work as one. Topping paddocks will waste the fertilizer value of the grass, which will oxidize into the air if it is not pushed down into the soil. And topping also costs money. The second way deferred grazing grows your farm more grass is once you graze a deferred paddock at high density, that paddock will bounce back quickly and can be added to the rotation much sooner than if it was machine harvested. This is the same paddock where the long green grass was trampled 30 days later on my farm. We had only had 5 millimeters of rain in the early summer. It was brought back into the rotation with high quality pasture for the milking herd, just as we needed more paddocks in the rotation to achieve optimal recovery and avoid what Voisin called untoward acceleration, where your stock get ahead of the grass. Basically, it helps prevent overgrazing. This is a close-up of that grass with only 5 millimeters of rain over the previous month. You can grow grass in a dry spell because of the armor you laid down on the soil and the soil carbon you put down into it. Every % increase in soil organic matter allows you to store 180,000 more liters of water per hectare. Soil armor on the soil, like this residual on the Pringle farm near Clydevale, feeds your soil livestock and gives them essential shelter. Worms can work day and night near the soil surface with cooler temperatures, more moisture, and protection. They draw the carbs that you grew for free through photosynthesis down into the lower soil layers to feed a whole universe of soil biology. You can turn your whole farm into a worm farm. This is good residual for sheep and beef farmers as well. All the grass has one bite taken off of it, and about 10% has slipped through the cracks, like the timothy you see here. This will provide a sustainable seed bank. There's no need to renew paddocks, plant diverse crops, or leave land fallow for reseeding. We found on our farm, if we mobbed our stock enough to encourage them to take one bite from most of the plants, it kept the plants vegetative. If some plants don't get eaten, they'll be trampled into fertilizer over time. In the meantime, they provide a microclimate to preserve moisture and shelter ground nesting birds. And it probably also provides a million other tasks we have yet to figure out. Work on growing what you want instead of spending money trying to get rid of what you don't want. So this is our New York pastures in the autumn, the end of the summer, and they look taggy from the distance as you look across it from a human perspective. This is what a cow's eye view of that same spot looks like in late summer. If you look down from a drone, you would hardly see the brown stalks in this paddock. Heaps of light gets through to grow lots of quality feed. If you use follow-up groups to eat tag, it'll work against you by stunting your good plants more than the weeds. The follow-up group will shorten your pasture recovery time on all your paddocks on the block because they increase the occupation time. This makes it more likely that your stock will get ahead of the grass. The net result is more weeds in all your paddocks on the grazing block. It's way better to combine your mobs and get stock in and out faster. All your stock deserve good feed. You will need a good grazing plan in place to make sure you have enough paddocks resting ahead of you to fully feed your stock. Topping and mowing are band-aids, not a solution. Topping damages the pasture and the soil and slows recovery when you need it the most, in the summer. If your desirable plants don't get a chance to fully recover, then weeds can outcompete them. So topping actually makes the problem worse. It's a cost that will also shrink your bank account. Instead of paying your diesel supplier, pay yourself or an employee to subdivide more paddocks and shift more often to promote quality. This level of seed head in my paddocks in New York by autumn was very profitable. It is less than 10% brown if you look down from a drone. This paddock at Alan and Sonia Richardson's farm in Harriet has very little seed head when viewed from above also, and has grown a huge feed bank of vegetative green grass by autumn. I can't believe how much it looks like our regenerative grass in autumn in New York, illustrating how quickly regenerative grazing works here in New Zealand with your long growing season. Reducing topping over time will save you money. In the meantime, you can top if your mobbing wasn't effective enough. And if you do top, target when the weeds have flowered but not made viable seed. I used to top once a year if an area had too much thistle or dock. Try topping at your target residual height instead of taking it down to the boards, so your good species can bounce back quickly to compete against deep-rooted weeds like thistle. Be careful and lift your topping heights gradually as you lift the pasture residuals gradually. Decking your paddocks before you top will result in more weeds because the good plants get set back the worst. Likewise, putting stock on a paddock you just harvested for hay or baleage to tidy it up will stunt the growth in that paddock. If you have problems with thistle, you can time high animal impact to trample thistles or other weeds. Because you have not topped the good plants, they will bounce back quickly enough to outcompete the thistle over time. If you do top, the thistle is the first plant to recover because its deep taproot stores more energy, and it doesn't solve the problem in the long term. So how do you know if your energy and your protein is balanced? Dairy farmers can target MUNs of 12 to 14. Try not to go over 18 for any length of time. These are my cows in New York. Your stock should have clean bums. When grazing animals have diarrhea, they feel like you do when you have it, sick. Cow dung should have a dent in the middle, and sheep dung should be clumps of pellets that cling together. You can check for urine pH in sheep or cattle. If the pH is high, your stock are dumping excess ammonia and will not perform. You want to target a pH of 7. You can get pH paper in the 4 to 9 range at your pharmacy. So plant roots go down as far as the plant is tall. In the US, we try to lift our covers gradually over the entire growing season, so we went into winter with deep roots to prevent pugging while winter grazing. A holistic winter grazing plan helps you allocate the feed wedge that you have built up. I help farmers complete these in April for the months of May through September. These are my cows grazing in winter in New York. The first round, we didn't need to start bale grazing. You want to keep armor on the soil. This is wintering on stockpiled grass and bale feeding in New York State. We had a no-bare soil policy year-round for 20 years, and this allowed us to enjoy big milk quality premiums. If you bale graze on pasture, provide enough hay or baleage every day so the stock don't strip off all your soil armor and pug up the paddock. It doesn't matter if you roll out the bales or not. In this case, we fed extra hay so the cows had something dry to lie on overnight to prevent frostbite teats. I never calved in the mud and avoided dirty cows because they can pick up mastitis organisms, even as a dry cow, that flare up at calving time once the milk flows. We used no antibiotics or dry treatments for 20 years. And even so, in 2007, we were number 17 for milk quality in the entire US out of 40,000 farms because of our no-bare soil policy. Our milk quality premiums were worth 15,000 New Zealand dollars per 100 cows. Bale grazing works even better in New Zealand. This photo was taken in June 2019 at Westridge Farm. Mark Anderson was bale grazing old paddocks on the support block that needed a fertility boost. He wintered groups of 100 cows on 4.6 hectare paddocks for 30 days. They got 12 bales on a new break every 3 days. It's important to shift the stock before they damage the soil. Buying hay to bale graze should come out of your fertilizer account because it brings nutrients onto your farm. Mark used portable water troughs for water to do this. If the weather had been wet, Mark would have needed to leave much more uneaten hay and shifted them sooner. Going into taller pasture covers makes this work better in wetter weather, and Mark has managed to build taller covers for his bale grazing this year. This was the result Mark got on his bale grazed paddocks. It's all about the carbon. These paddocks will outperform in dry years because the carbon Mark is building up. Here's a close-up of the pasture that was bale grazed on Westridge Farm. It shows the diversity that Mark stimulated in the bale grazed paddock year 1 with no new seed planted. There are other ways to promote diversity without renewing the whole paddock. Andrew Roy in Edendale was pleased with the results after he spun on red clover in the autumn after decking it twice with sheep. Dean Martin has a video describing how he no-tills a winter crop into perennial paddocks in March. You can go to his Glenlands Farm website. It's very easy to double your animal density on a dairy farm. This is Scott Matheson giving his cows 4 breaks of feed per day in Southland in autumn. The Soil Conservation Service had me fence animals out of this riparian area in New York, which used to have bare soil on the sides and bottom of the stream bed. I fenced the cattle out, but then I used it as a paddock. We waited for dry weather only to graze the paddock. With soil biology working well, the dung from the stock will be devoured by soil life long before it can wash into a waterway. The phalaris here is 2 meters high. In winter, this grass acts like a thatched roof on the soil in this waterway, creating soil armor. The water is crystal clear here, even in flood events. Just some more thoughts of mine. I hear you're going to plant billions of trees here in New Zealand. Instead of monocrop pine, please consider diverse native forestry or a mix of native and exotic hardwoods. It's amazing how many tree species grow in New Zealand. This photo, it was taken out of my front window in New York. The average Northeast US farm is 20 to 40% native forest because the Soil Conservation Service will not allow us to put crops on steep country, and they have all grown back into forest, which is highly valued. Timber is often selectively harvested by farmers every 10 years, or more often if they have to pay their rates. Clear cutting is rare. One hard maple cherry or walnut veneer tree can bring thousands of US dollars. Forestry in New York is worth over $10 billion. Maple syrup adds to many farm incomes and is worth $30 million in New York. Hunters harvest 227,000 deer a year, and people gather delicacies like ramps and ginseng. Autumn leaf peeping brings in tourism dollars as well. In your native forest, Mother Nature, as usual, has figured out how to most efficiently harvest solar energy. You say native forest grows slowly, but rapidly growing wood is weak and poor quality compared to the valuable veneer logs a native hardwood can produce. Value may be another strategy you can use as opposed to the race to the bottom. Selective cutting every decade evens out cash flow and provides firewood from the tops and cull trees, which are taken to improve the value of the stand. Removing trees at the end of their life and using the wood for durable goods is a way to keep carbon, which was sequestered by the forest, out of the atmosphere. Adding value to quality lumber could create jobs for you in the future. Unlike pine plantation, native forests allow light into the understory to support shrubs and ferns, which prevent erosion and enhance water quality. In New Zealand, are you putting a value on the ecosystem services that native forest provides? What is the ecosystem service of clean water worth? You'll find out when the water supply to Auckland dries up. New York City has figured it out already when they created the Watershed Agricultural Council for the most southerly region of New York State. 578 million New Zealand dollars are given to farmers every year to implement best management practices like building standoff pads, effluent storage, fencing, and laneways. Participation is voluntary and stands at 90%. The goal is to keep farmers profitable and on the land as stewards. In return, New York City gets over 4 trillion liters of clean water a day that is such good quality it does not need filtering as required by federal law. This saves New York City $13 billion, which is what it would cost to build a water filtration plant to serve 8 million people. City people value farmers and want to encourage farmers to stay on the land, and they partner with them to maintain a healthy water catchment and a food shed. This helps farms to be viable at lower stocking rates. Since I sold my farm, I visited and studied farms in Central and South America, California, Europe, and New Zealand to see what holistic managers are doing in other climates. And that is how I ended up here, and I hope you let me stay. I now teach farmers how to make regenerative grazing work for them through my consultancy service, Next Level Grazing. I think this is how I can best help make the world a better place for my children and yours. So I'd like to thank you for listening, and this is the end of my presentation. If I go to the stop share. Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, you can contact me either by email, or you can go to my Facebook page, Next Level Grazing. Have a great day.